Thank you again for being here. So, of course, you know why you're here. We're going to be talking to you tonight about your Ci3T work that's happening in your school and district. David's going to give you the full rundown of the Ci3T model in just a little bit to kind of give you a sense for what Ci3T is all about. And then we'll start unpacking some of the specific details about things that are happening at this time of the year, the beginning of the year, which is a really, really exciting time of the year because we're introducing all kinds of new ideas for students and getting everyone settled in the classroom. So David will unpack that for us. As we are moving through the session for tonight, we would love for you to engage with us in a number of ways. Of course, you will have chances to chat with us here during the breakout rooms. You can always use the Zoom chat to ask questions or ask for clarifications or provide commentary by all means. And if you happen to be on social media, we are working to have more of a presence on Instagram and Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. So we would love for you to follow us on those platforms, and that way you'll kind of be you'll have the most recent updates that we're sharing in social media as they come available. So I think our Instagram handle is right there on the screen for you at Ci3T model. Please don't ask me how to use Instagram because I don't understand it at all. I've tried, but I'm sure somebody out there knows how to use, all that good stuff. And yeah, we're definitely sharing new content there all the time. So definitely check us out. And then just to kind of contextualize where tonight fits into professional learning that is available for people that work at your school. So you work at a school that's implementing Ci3T, and we are really happy to have you here because the Project Empower series is really special to us. This is a series that we offer that's available to anybody that works in your school and potentially even some members of the community at your school to come and learn about Ci3T, Ci3T related strategies, and some additional resources that we want to share with you all. And this is a really exciting time for us because we spend a lot of time working with leadership team members at your school. Those are people that are administrators, people in a leadership position relative to guiding the Ci3T work that's happening. But we really cherish the opportunity to have anytime we can with just faculty and staff members or other folks that are coming to learn more about Ci3T and to engage in conversations with you. So we're very thankful for you to be here tonight as part of that Empower series. And we'd love for you to invite your colleagues or for you to return for future sessions as we move through this series. We'll cover all kinds of great strategies and intervention materials throughout the course of the year, ranging from tier 1 strategies that are kind of for everybody, prevention work, as well as more intensive tier 2 and tier 3 interventions that can help kids that have academic challenges, behavioral challenges, social and emotional challenges. We'll cover the whole spectrum there. So we're really excited for the whole year, and we'd love to have you back for as many sessions as you would like to attend. So with that said, I do want to move away from the PowerPoint for 1 second just to give you a quick tour of our website and some of the available resources that we're going to encourage you to access as part of this series, and then just part of your general professional learning journey in terms of becoming a seasoned and expert Ci3T implementer at your school. So because your school is participating in a research project that's called Project Enhance, you have special access to a website on our or a certain page on our website called ci3t.org/enhance. It's password protected, which means it's kind of exclusive for you. You are welcome to sign into this page anytime that you'd like to, and you're also welcome to share information about how to get to this page with your colleagues if you'd like to. We just ask that you only share this with people that you work with at your school and not to share outside your school, because these materials are actually being tested as part of a randomized control trial that's happening right now. And so we want to be careful not to overshare, but in the near future, this information will become available to everyone. So we're not quite in the open to the world yet phase, but that's coming soon. So let me give you a quick rundown of how to access the website and what you'll find there, and then I'll turn it over to David to get started. So what you're looking at right now, if I'm sharing my screen successfully, can you all see the ci3t.org website? Perfect. So on ci3t.org, you'll find these tabs at the top. If you visit the Project Enhance tab right here, the first time you click it, it's going to ask you to enter a password. That password is the word enhance, Ci3T, ! All lowercase. And my colleague, Eric Comment is going to put that into the chat to make that a little bit easier for you to get typed in. And once you're behind that password wall, what you're going to find here is a whole collection of different resources that you are welcome to use for any purpose at all that you'd like to in terms of supporting people at your school. We've got modules for leadership team members. We've got modules that focus on tier 1 practices and strategies. We've got modules on low-intensive teacher delivered strategies like behavior-specific praise and instructional choice. And then we have strategy or intervention specific modules for tier 2 and tier 3 supports as well. And then tonight, we're actually going to go deep on a module called Universal Reinforcement System, which we think of as sort of a foundational element of the Ci3T model. And so we'll get into the nitty gritty on that a little bit later. But we'll continue to return back to that website because that's kind of a place we're going to hope you will access some resources as we move forward. All right. So with that said, David, I'm going to turn it on over to you. And yeah, just good to see everybody tonight.
Hi, everybody. We are so glad, like Mark said, to have you here. I got so excited setting up the screen share that didn't mute. Here's the agenda for where we're headed tonight. My name's David Royer. I'm at the University of Louisville. I'm going to do a quick overview of Ci3T just to catch y'all up on the big picture, and then look at rolling out your plan and sharing successes as we do that every year. And we'll look at implementing each of the domains at tier 1. And then I'll turn it back over to Mark, who will go through some more details into the procedures for teaching the plan, reinforcing the plan, and monitoring the plan. And then we'll wrap up. So first, I want to just say again, welcome. We're just so excited that you are here and want to thank you for your commitment to supporting all students in their multiple needs across academic, behavior, and social domains. We know that most students in our school do well. We aim for that 80 to 90% who are successful with our tier 1 implementation. But we know that that's not enough for everybody and that some students need more. And we think of especially our students with internalizing and externalizing behavior patterns, those with emotional and behavioral disorders, and point prevalence rates show that up to 20% of all students have at least a mild or moderate form of an emotional and behavioral disorder, while less than 1%, and for the last over 10 years, it's been half of 1% of those students actually receive special education services under the eligibility criteria of emotionally disturbed. So that leaves the rest of the students in our general education classrooms, and we want to empower all of our faculty, all of our staff with strategies to be able to support those students and their multiple needs across domains, keep those students in the classroom and feel empowered to work with them, have the self-efficacy in their classroom procedures to be able to support them and not feel the need to send them to a specialist or send them to the office. So we're shifting our perspective by implementing Ci3T and having that system level overview of what can we do not only in my classroom, but bigger, as a grade, as a school, as a district. And so we thank you for being here and continuing your learning and refining of Ci3T as we work to enhance all of the implementation support materials that we'll be sharing with you tonight and that we've been working with you for these last few years. As you know, and have heard, Ci3T started back in 1996, 1997, getting field tested in California, moved across the country, and continues to spread. And you're here tonight as part of Project Enhance, and you're in the enhanced condition, which gives you access to the resources that Mark was showing you on the website and that Eric put in the chat, the password so that you can access. So we're in our last year here, and we're hoping to be able on schedule to release all these materials to the public. But at this time, please don't share them beyond your school. You're welcome to share within your school. And the video that's being recorded tonight, you can share as well. We just ask that you let people know who you share it with, not to share it beyond your school so that we can continue to test these materials. All right, so overviewing Ci3T, we know it's that tiered model, the logic there that if we can provide high quality education at tier 1, not just for academics, which we're all pretty used to, but also explicitly teaching behavior and social skills at tier 1 for all students, we hope to get 80 to 90% of our students being successful with that. So that means we're teaching a behavior component through positive behavior interventions and supports. We've got a social skills component that's specific to our school needs. So anti-bullying, if that's what we need, or character education, whatever our school needs for social emotional well-being and mental health. And keep in mind that tier 1, even though the green kind of gets cut off because of tier 2 and tier 3, but those are layered on top. So all students continue continue to get tier 1 even while they receive tier 2 support. So we don't pull them out of their core reading instruction, for example, to give them a tier 2 reading support. We want them to get tier 1 and then get an additional amount with tier 2 or tier 3. And when we think of students who do need more than tier 1, we need to be thinking, is it because they need some extra instruction? So is it a acquisition deficit where they just don't know how and they need the extra instruction? Or is it more of a fluency or performance deficit where they know how, but they need to work at it, or they're choosing not to do it? So what can we do to help motivate or inspire them or explain why this is important to learn? So tier 2 is often small group instruction, but doesn't have to be. And for students who need even more than those tier 2 supports, we reserve our most intensive supports at tier 3. These are often individualized, customized, and often one-on-one, but still could be small group if the dosage is high enough. For example, when I taught high school for 8 years, one of my favorite classes to teach was an intensive reading clinic. I worked with a small group of 5 students, but it was for 100 minutes a day. So we considered that a tier 3 support because of the dosage. It was a double block of that reading intervention that was really intensive, even though it was still small group. So we reserve that at tier 3. A very often used one is a functional assessment-based intervention. And that's considered tier 3 because of the resources involved, the time that it takes to collect the functional behavioral assessment and design the behavior intervention plan based on the function of the behavior that we identify. So the personnel and the time, that's highly customized. So tier 3 we reserve for our students with our most intensive needs. Across Ci3T, we got 3 core features, 3 domains for academics, behavior, and social. And when we think of the academic, we're thinking we got to address our state standards, our college and career ready standards. We benchmark 3 times a year, or academic screening 3 times a year. Those terms are interchangeable. And we're choosing and designing, hopefully with full district support, curricula that have a lot of evidence behind them, research behind them, showing that when we implement them as designed, they're going to lead to the desired shifts in our student outcomes. And I teach classes here at the university, and I get undergrads who say, but wait a minute, shouldn't all schools just be doing that regardless of whether they have Ci3T or MTSS or anything else? I'm like, yeah, they should. You'd think they would, but not all schools do, is the reality. Well, there's many schools still that every teacher in the elementary level teaches reading however they want because they know how to read, and they teach math in whatever way they want because they know how to do math. And you get some great teachers doing that and students excel, and you get some other teachers that aren't as talented at that. And so students fall behind and they get this deficit that accumulates over the years. So instead of that, we want to choose a validated curriculum with the research behind it and implement it school-wide so that all students are getting the same experience at tier 1 with a high quality curricula that are implemented with integrity. So we know that they're receiving that, and we're tracking that they're receiving that. And so when they looks like they need more, we can tell the families that they've received this high quality instruction, and that's how we know that they need more, not because we're not sure if they had a high quality education already or not. Behavior components, this is new to a lot of people. We have to teach behavior these days as explicitly as we teach academics. So we customize for our school based on our context and our culture and our community. What are the behavioral expectations that students need to know for success in the classroom, in the hallway, in the cafeteria, out on the playground or in the quad, on the bus, arrival, dismissal, all the different school settings, academic and non-academic. We teach those explicitly with lesson plans, just like academics. We give students opportunities to practice engaging in those expectations that we have for their behavior. And then we reinforce it with behavior-specific praise, paired with tickets as our token economy, not every time, but randomly, so that students don't expect a ticket every time they meet an expectation, but we always have the behavior-specific praise. The power's in the praise, not the ticket, but they can use those in their token economy to exchange them for a reinforcer later as well. This is highly customized to the school based on the school's needs, and it's not a curriculum like academics that you can pull off the shelf and implement. And then our third domain, social and emotional well-being, similarly to PBIS, it's something that you want to choose specific to your school and customize it in that way. But we do recommend that you do choose a validated curriculum, something that is off the shelf that you can implement and know that it's going to work when you put it into place as it's designed. Versus we've worked with schools over the time that they The counselor knows somebody that is designing their own curriculum and they're taking a chance on implementing it. And over time, we don't know if it's going to work. And that's a risk we can't afford to take. The time that we get with our students is so short. We need to choose a curriculum that has the evidence behind it so that we know when we implement it, it's going to lead to the desired shifts that we need. So we choose a curriculum based on the needs, whether it's an anti-violence, like you see here, some recommendations, character education, or anti-bullying. What is it that our school needs? And that may change every so many years as the needs of our community and school changes as well. Everything that we do in Ci3T is put into this Ci3T implementation manual, and you can see full examples of these on our ci3t.org webpage. On the COVID page, actually, is where you can see full exemplars at the different school levels. But in here, we identify what are the roles and responsibilities for all of the different groups. So here you see students circled, below that faculty and staff. So we're clearly outlining, like a blueprint, what it is that each person in the building needs to be able to do. So students need to arrive on time and stay all day and give their best effort. For faculty and staff, you see some examples here about explicitly stating what do they need to teach in the academic domain. And that includes low intensity strategies, like Mark was mentioning earlier, that we have modules for since you're in the enhanced condition. And with the behavior component, and we'll look at this a little today too, what is the reactive plan? So even though we're teaching the expectations and we're doing all that we can to prevent challenging behavior, what do we do when challenging behaviors do occur? And how do we do it in a way that's respectful to our students and educational as well, and not just yelling at them and sending them out to the office, because that might be reinforcing the behaviors we're not trying to reinforce. In the social skills column, again, we explicitly state what is the curriculum and what is the dosage so that every adult knows, what are we doing? Are we doing a lesson twice a week or once a week? And is the counselor helping out periodically? What is the schedule for rolling out our social skills curriculum? So with these roles and responsibilities, the implementation manual also lays out what are our procedures for teaching this plan to all of our stakeholder groups. What are our procedures for reinforcing the plan as well as monitoring it? And we'll look at some of those today. And when we think of monitoring specifically, we want to think of collecting enough data to know, is it working? Is it being implemented as designed? And what do people think about it? The social validity. Because if they believe in the plan, that's pretty predictive of they're going to implement the plan as it's been designed. Again, you can see full exemplars on our webpage on the COVID site there, and look at the preschool example, the elementary, middle, and high school. Those are all laid out. And you have access, as Mark was showing you, to some additional materials, these enhanced materials. If you go to the Enhanced tab and type the password there, that's been put into the chat for you. And if it's your first time visiting that page, there's a place where you can register. All you do is type in your email so that the web page knows that you're a return visitor, and it helps us collect a little bit of data about how often these pages are being accessed and used. So you can click on there first, otherwise feel free to go to the module that's of interest. And we've got a whole suite of modules, and the schools that you're in have been helping us by providing information and feedback and allowing us to revise and update these as we've gone. And we're just really proud of all of these modules out there as resources for you. And we wouldn't expect you to be able to go through them all at once, but some schools are taking the time to map out a professional learning plan for the semester or the year. What do we need at the start of the year? When do we want to roll out the different low intensity strategies in a way that's manageable for all of our faculty and staff? So speaking of rolling out the plan and how we do that, let's take a look at how we roll out our Ci3T plan every year. Okay, so as we roll out our plan, we're thinking beyond just our faculty and staff and beyond our students. We need to be thinking about our families and our community, as well as administrators. So administrators are part of this, and they need to be aware, of course, of all the updates and model the updates as we roll out our plan. But we want to make sure we're involving everybody as much as possible. So when we think of those groups, we want to have a different plan for each of those, and we'll look at some ideas. So starting with faculty and staff, we definitely want to have the updated Ci3T implementation manual. Typically every summer, updates are made based on data that we collected throughout the year from the social validity surveys, from the treatment integrity measures that we did, and anything else that we've got. Even our student outcome data can let us know how we're doing and do we need to adjust anything. If that involves changing our matrix or our expectations or any of our posters, we want to, of course, make sure those get out to everybody. So here's a picture of a middle school that had like a welcome packet, and they just handed every teacher the poster for their classroom expectations and a giant one for their full matrix, a stack of their Cougar Cash, which was their PBIS tickets, their manual, and then they had the wristbands that reminded them of their school-wide expectations. Within the manual, they roll out the plan to faculty and staff, letting them know what are the updates or which of the low intensity strategies are we going to focus on this year. Maybe they remind them of the reactive plan and how to log the discipline referrals with their new online form or system, and remind them of any changes to the social skills curriculum and the schedule for rolling that out, making sure that they've got their updated matrix up on the wall, the giant one, big enough that they can use it as a teaching tool to refer to and redirect students to whenever there is a challenge in the classroom, plus specific setting posters throughout the setting. So the hallway posters in the hallway and the cafeteria posters are in the cafeteria, so that all adults can refer to them, whether they're their students that they encounter or not, as a reminder, or just to see this is what I should be looking for so I can reinforce these behaviors and expectations when I see them in the hallway and in the cafeteria, regardless of whether they're my student or not. So the janitor, the office staff, anybody roaming the halls, going from location to location, even related service providers who aren't at that school only, but multiple schools, they know what are this school's expectations and can be on the lookout and can praise students for engaging in those and reinforce them. So hopefully they continue to increase over time. Part of rolling out the plan can include an exciting event. So if you have the resources to have an assembly, schools may do this whole school depending on the size, or maybe by grade level, or lower elementary has an assembly and upper elementary has assembly. High schools, middle schools may have a pep rally or something, and they're teaching the expectations. They're reminding them every year, even if they're the same. They have skits, and the upper elementary students maybe play the role of the teachers who are getting in trouble by not following expectations. That's always a riot, and the kids love it. Whereas the student or the teachers play the bad students getting in trouble, and the students play the teachers rather, who correct them and remind them of the expectations. So whatever you can do to always be using the language, the common language across all the grade levels for the school-wide expectations, having that involved in the exciting throughout the year, but especially at the kickoff here with any pep rallies. Getting the information out to families in the community is important too. So during the building year, your school drafted a parent letter to send out, letting them know the expectations. And on our website and in that building year, you probably built a pamphlet, a little brochure, and you can have those stacked at the front office for anybody who's visiting to pick up and know, oh, this is a Ci3T school. Here's what we do at Tier 1 for all students. Here's our expectations. So the flip side of that page is the whole matrix for the school-wide expectations. So as a speech language pathologist visiting, I know what are the expectations here at this school. With that manual, you can also have successes be shared. So checking in, and if you would, if you pull up the chat box here in Zoom, would you drop in a yes or a no? Do you know where your Ci3T implementation manual is? Do you have access to it? And then after you say yes, or I'm looking for it right now, what are some success? We'd love to just read a success that you've all had throughout the year, and our whole team here will drop in some successes that we've had in supporting our schools into the chat. What have you seen so far this year that's been done well, or that you were excited to celebrate, or what are you looking forward to this year? So let's drop a few things in the chat, including if you know where your Ci3T manual is, and what are some successes? Excellent. Eric knows where his manual is. He pulls it up at each meeting he goes to. Now, Joni and I, when we support schools, we're pulling up their manual. Mark says, seen a lot of schools sharing updated manuals by Google Drive. Excellent. Some make them into websites. Some print. That's a good point. So especially in the beginning years, it's really helpful to have printed versions of the manual so people can hold on to something tangible and refer to it, and it sits right there, and they can carry it with them to their faculty and staff meetings every month. And every meeting that starts, it begins with, here's our triangle, and here's where we're working today. We're focusing on this tier 1 element, or today we're going to look at these low intensity strategies as tier 2 supports, things like that. What's something that everybody's looking forward to this year in terms of Ci3T or your school in general? Let's hear a few future thoughts. What are you looking forward to? Excellent. Tammy's looking forward to the consistency. Mark's looking forward to leading professional development, managing the acting out cycle. Absolutely. That's a real popular session. So hopefully everybody will come back for that. I look forward to that as well. All right. If we continue on, and feel free to keep adding to the chat any thoughts you have about successes, what's been going well, or what you're looking forward to. So rolling out the plan, you see pictures here too. They got new, I think these were either hallway signs or cafeteria pendants, reminding of the school-wide expectations on the left there. That's a middle school that had bulldogs as their mascot. And then they had these boxes you see in the middle that were drawings where you only need one ticket. You can drawing. So you could be an administrator for half a day. What kid wouldn't love to win that? And what fun would that be? So having those raffle ticket boxes that you could put one ticket in, and then they had a store menu also where you could save up a certain amount and get a sure shot, as Kathleen would say, where I know if I save up this many tickets, I can buy this thing, or if I only got one today or this week, I can put that in for a chance to win something. All right, let's look at a little more specifics for implementing at tier 1 across those 3 domains: academics, behavior, and social. So if we start with rolling out our plan at academics, so implementing tier 1 in the academic domain, we of course in our Ci3T implementation manual, if you could pull that up, take a look at what your school has in that column for you as faculty and staff. What does it say as far as teaching the core curriculum? Have you identified what is your reading curriculum? And does it say, if you're elementary, that you're implementing it for 90 minutes a day uninterrupted, just the reading component, with additional time for writing and the listening and the speaking components of an English language arts program? So the recommendation of 90 minutes uninterrupted reading is a strong one with a lot of research behind it. And as part of your academics, are you implementing low intensity strategies? Which ones are listed in your implementation manual? Is it all 7, or is there a focus on, in these first few years of implementing, maybe it's pre-correction, behavior specific praise, and opportunities to respond? Hopefully all 7. And then you're thinking, what professional learning do we need to provide to get all of our faculty and staff informed and up to speed on all 7 of those? And when are we going to do that? So with that academics rolling out, be sure you're familiar with your plan. Here's an exemplar from the elementary implementation manual on ci3t.org on the COVID page. So you can see they've named the Scott Forsman Reading Street curriculum, and they've listed all 7 of the low intensity strategies, and they're doing 60 minutes of math. So with math, we just follow the curriculum's recommendation there, but they're very clear as to what are my expectations, and this is how I'm going to roll it out, and this is how I'm going to implement the tier 1 plan. And I should be reflecting. As a teacher, I'm asking myself these questions. What do I need to know? Okay, I found it in my implementation manual. How am I doing with those low intensity supports? I'm pretty confident with behavior specific praise, but I really should go watch Tammy as she implements high rates of opportunities to respond. I know she does a great job of that. So during my planning period, I'm going to go see if I can watch her and get some tips. So how am I doing with all of those? Am I using reinforcement and tickets enough? Am I implementing things and monitoring that I'm implementing things as designed? So that's the academic domain. So as I'm implementing with the behavior domain, very similarly, am I teaching the lesson plans for each of the settings for where these behavior expectations are defined in my matrix? And am I doing that on schedule? Am I going to be ready to do that before or after fall break or winter break and spring break or any other holidays when there's breaks, so I can reinforce and pre-correct for those challenging behaviors that tend to amp up right before break time? Do I have my matrix on display so I can refer to it as a teaching tool? And when a student does engage in challenging behavior, can I just quickly with a motion redirect and remind them of the expectation? Or do I need to follow my plan? Do I need to follow the 6-step approach to responding? And you've hopefully got something very similar in your implementation manual, or we've got a whole module that I'll show you in just a moment for that plan there for responding to challenging behavior, including the two pictures there that are the definitions for what are minor behaviors, what are major behaviors. And that's what the two columns are in the blue and the orange in the flow chart. So I know what is classroom managed, what is teacher managed, what am I expected to be able to handle in my classroom versus when there is something a little more serious and I need to send it to the office or call in the office to help manage it because it's a crisis, or do I need to do a room clear so that I don't reinforce the student who's trying to get out of the class, but instead keep the rest of the classroom safe while sending them to a neighbor buddy classroom that I've set up. So this 6-step instructional approach is key. When a challenging behavior does occur, am I showing empathy first? Because I don't know what's happened before the student got to my classroom. I need to find out. There could be something major that happened. And just by showing that I care and don't immediately just yell at the student from across the room or kick them out of the classroom, just by getting down on their level and, a little distance in case they are angry. I don't want them to lash out physically, but to ask them like, hey, it looks like you're having a little trouble getting started here. Is there something I can do or something that you need? Or do you need a quick break? Do you want to go get a glass of drink of water and come right back? Or maybe they need to go talk to the counselor for just a few minutes. And I had great success with this with my students teaching in high school. I could tell they're upset. Something happened during the break time, the nutrition period, and they're coming in very just grumpy and they're agitated. And if I just showed empathy first privately and said, hey, what's going on? Do you want to talk to me? Do you want to go get a drink of water or run a lap or talk to your counselor? And they could come back in 5 minutes from that and be fully engaged with the lesson. Versus if I had ignored those signs and just said, get to work, then that would have escalated the situation and not have been a productive day. They would have maybe missed the whole period of learning instead of 5 minutes just to get their faculties collected and be ready to engage in the learning. So showing empathy first is key. I'm maintaining the flow of instruction. Like if I notice the group in the back's off task and noisy, chatty, I can keep instructing the rest of the class while I start walking back that way, praising students who are on task and meeting expectations, while I eventually get back to the students who are off task and just quietly and as privately as possible, show empathy, but remind them of the expectations to be on task, be calm, cool, and collected, whatever the language is that we use in our expectation matrix, redirect them and give them some time and space. I'm going to move away and let them save face in front of their peers if that's what they need to get back on task. So I give them the redirect and walk away and keep an eye out for them when they are back on task to praise that, to try and reinforce that. So later they know that's how they get my attention, by being on task and meeting expectations. When that doesn't work, I can continue to follow the flow chart. So be sure you've got your implementation manual pulled up and review what are the steps to follow. What do you do when there is minors that repeat and those 6 steps aren't working? So you can learn more about that in the enhanced resource, the module 6.2.8, or look for this picture on the enhanced webpage. You'll recognize her breaking her pencil. And you can share this with your faculty and staff, and they can read the ebook version that you see on the top there if they want to take their time and study it and take notes and go through it page by page. Or they can click and go through the interactive resource, which is like a narrated PowerPoint, but has some interactivity built into it. So that's a little more relaxed, where you can sit back and absorb if you're more of an auditory learner, perhaps, if you prefer that modality. And then there's some checks for understandings that you can engage in, some activities and interactions. So check that out and share that with your faculty and staff. Send them the link from that enhanced page to this module if you think that would help them as a school get on the same page and be consistent with following those 6 steps for when challenging behavior does occur. You could also just share out specific materials from that module, like this infographic, to remind them, because maybe you've already taught and gone through the module with them, but you could just share the infographic for, hey, remember this? We talked about this at the end of last year. Here's the 6 steps. Maybe post this somewhere where you remember to go through these when challenging behavior occurs. There's other infographics that you can look at, remembering what to do, what not to do. We got some examples and non-examples. So that's from the behavior component in our implementation manuals, and remembering to do as much as we can to prevent challenging behavior, using our behavior-specific praise and pairing it occasionally with tickets, and teaching those expectations at the key time periods throughout the year, but then following that reactive plan when challenging behavior does occur. As a teacher, I'm going to reflect. I'm going to ask myself, what do I need to know? Good. I found it in the implementation manual. How am I doing with that? Am I teaching all of those lesson plans that our school has developed for those specific settings? And if you don't have those, just let us know. We can help you develop those specific setting lesson plans that mirror the columns in your expectation matrix. Am I reinforcing at a high enough rate? Am I using lots of behavior specific praise throughout the day, throughout each period, throughout each subject? Too often when we go into school to either support Ci3T, or as a university professor, I go and do field supervision and support teachers who are learning to be teachers, rather, they're teacher candidates. And there's hardly any praise, whether it's general or behavior specific. So we want to increase our rate of praise because students need to know what it is that they should be engaging in to be successful throughout the day. And by praising them, we let them know that, or acknowledging and just recognizing what it is they're doing to meet expectations. So have I been doing that for students who are meeting expectations? And am I monitoring my rate of praise? Am I monitoring that I'm engaging in teaching those lesson plans, checking it off, tracking that I've done it, all those things to monitor the plan. And then for our third domain, the social, emotional well-being and mental health domain, how am I doing at implementing these? So looking at my Ci3T implementation manual in the social skills column, which curriculum is named? In this example, it's second step. All right, am I teaching the second step lessons? Am I following the curriculum map and the guide? Am I logging when I'm teaching those? Or do we have an online version that automatically tracks? If I'm using certain curriculum that have web-based components, they may track that for you. Or we might develop our own tracker in Excel, or we've got some options here through the enhanced modules to help you do that. In the tier 2 module, there's some great tools there that help track as a school or as a classroom for implementations or school-wide supports that we're doing. So you could do something similar for the social skills. See what the curriculum manufacturer, the publisher, has. So if you're not using second step, if you have something else, see what they have for tracking and for the implementation guide and map. So there's usually something there to support you. So check that out. Make sure you're following it. Make sure all of your faculty and staff are modeling good social skills in front of the students, because we got to support our own mental health and social emotional well-being as the adults in the building. So we want to model not only the behaviors from the expectation matrix, but the social skills language. And we want to incorporate that social skills language throughout the day as well, through all of our lesson planning. So monitoring and asking ourselves, how am I doing with these lessons? Am I teaching them on time? Am I integrating them into daily instruction? Maybe I use the integrated lesson plan and look at, I think I went the wrong direction. Oh, there we go. The integrated lesson plan to show that while I'm working on my academic domains, I'm also thinking in advance, what behaviors am I going to need to pre-correct for and remind students to use and be ready to use, like turn taking or perspective taking? And what social skills do I need as well? So I'm marking where are the good opportunities to pre-correct? Where can I be actively supervising? Where can I pre-script some things to be on the lookout for behavior-specific praise based on what I know are typical challenging behaviors? So if I use individual whiteboards for math and we get out of control sometimes with those, I can pre-correct for it, but also script some praise statements to use when they are using their individual whiteboards appropriately. You might check out these modules for the low intensity strategies, of course, but also check out the module 7.2 for embedding and integrating the Ci3T domains, all three, into your daily instruction. There's some good resources there.
Okay, thanks, David. That was a really great introduction to Ci3T, and I loved how that discussion kind of dealt with some of the nitty-gritty issues of like, how do we implement specific practices? And I think we'll be shedding some additional light on those types of questions and topics in this next section as well. So we're going to be going through procedures for teaching, reinforcing, and monitoring. And if you're curious about what this looks like in your school's plan, we'll encourage you to look at your Ci3T implementation manual and kind of make some connections between what I'll be sharing on the screen and what's written in your school's manual. The idea is you have this great comprehensive plan, but words on a page often aren't enough to make a change occur. And so we need to think about, how do we provide professional development to teachers to our colleagues? How do we provide instruction to students, and how do we share information to family members? And also, how do we reinforce the behaviors that we're hoping to see change as part of our school plan to create this positive, productive learning environment for students? And so what you see here are kind of like, how do we put feet to the words in that manual to make sure that this is actually going to be enacted in the real world? So the procedures for teaching section is all about thinking about these three groups of people: faculty and staff, students, and parents and community members, and taking effort and time to teach them about the plan. So as you're thinking about this as a faculty and staff member, what you might be thinking about is things that your school's Ci3T leadership team has done or could do to support your learning around Ci3T. And if you are like, I actually need some help with that, or I need access to that document, take a couple notes down tonight, and you can circle back to somebody on your school's team, and I'm sure they'd be happy to help link you up with a resource or the information that you need. So for example, hopefully, if you're here, that you are able to find your school's Ci3T implementation manual. That's a really good first start to make sure you have the information that you need to know to be successful implementing Ci3T. And hopefully you've had some opportunity to receive training on Ci3T at the beginning of this school year. Oftentimes, you guys a lot of you are in schools that have been implementing for several years at this point. And as schools get further into implementation, occasionally that training, that preliminary beginning of the year training, can kind of fall by the wayside. But as we know, there are so many new people coming into our schools every year that it's really important to give that initial orientation and training to folks as they're being sort of onboarded into the system. And so if you happen to not have had an opportunity like that, it'd be great to drop by your Ci3T leadership team members and just say, hey, where can we get some orientation materials? And is there any time we could talk about this as a staff? Because I think it would be really helpful for us all to be on the same page about this. And then just another example might be thinking about what are some ways that you can access ongoing support for your work. I really hope that you are, enjoying your time here tonight and see us as a resource that you can keep circling back to as you're having questions about your implementation. But your leadership team members are also a wealth of knowledge, right? So making sure you kind of know people in your school that you can go to and say, hey, I need help with this part of our tier 1 plan, or I need help implementing this tier 2 support for one of my students. Just knowing where to go to get that support is a really important piece. And then for students, David touched on a lot of this at the beginning, but really making sure that we have a robust way of teaching expectations to students is super important. So as you're thinking about what's happening in your classrooms to teach those expectations, it is very much worth the time to set it aside and not treat it as something we do just really quick and then move on, like really spending time developing the vocabulary and helping students to understand why those expectations exist and why they're relevant to their lives at school and why they might actually benefit from those expectations being a thing, and really putting them in the driver's seat of owning those expectations as part of their school experience. That's really impactful and really, I think, especially at the secondary level, really critical for students to make choices that are oriented towards those expectations because they see themselves as benefiting from them. Additionally, David mentioned this before as well. The signage is low key, really, really important in Ci3T or PBIS. Signs are things that fade into the background, and if you're not attuned to them, they cannot be particularly meaningful. But think about the sign not as something that you're expecting students to see those expectations and magically follow them, but rather the sign, the signage, the posters, the expectation matrix, that's your visual cue to remind you that, oh, hey, I should probably mention before we get started with our history lesson or our math lesson or our orchestra lesson, let's go over the expectations real quick before the lesson starts, just to provide those pre-corrections about expected behaviors. And really by making that part of our classroom culture on a consistent basis, that's how we're going to get the most out of those expectations. And just again, we'll talk about the tickets in just a few minutes, but that's a really important piece to the teaching element as well. And whatever you can do, especially in middle school, to link through to the program that your school is using to teach social and emotional learning is really important. I know a lot of schools do advisory-based SEL instruction, and if you don't happen to teach that program, getting familiar with some of the vocabulary is really important because we're believers that you can't just teach those skills once a week or twice a week and really have them make much of a difference. You want to put that language in front of people on a regular basis, give them opportunities to practice and see how it's useful. So like getting attuned to your school-wide schedule for teaching those lessons, those SEL, social emotional learning lessons, is great, because then it gives you the opportunity to embed it into your lessons period by period or day by day, which is pretty cool, because then you really are helping students get more out of that instruction than they would if it was just something they heard once a day. And then lastly, not leaving out the parents, families, and community members. This is really critical. Just to kind of take a holistic approach to supporting our students and their communities, helping to, make sure people are aware of like, hey, what are our school-wide expectations? What are our opportunities when we're in front of, parents and family members? We only get so many chances to interact with those folks. And so helping them to see what our values are at the school, how those values can connect with their values, and having them, be involved in some of the vocabulary around school-wide expectations or SEL curricula it's a good idea. If we can bring together as many parties to support students across environments, that's really where we're going to get the most benefits for students. So if you've got like a website or, back to school nights or anything like that set up that's coming up in the near future, thinking about how you can just work in a little bit of your Ci3T work into your communication with family members is a potentially very impactful opportunity. And as we're thinking about teaching, which is really all about professional development, especially for ourselves as faculty and staff members, we have a couple of modules that we think are really useful starting points. So on the far left of your screen, you see an effective onboarding processes module. This is really specifically made for leaders in your building. And the hope is that they're looking at this module and thinking, hey, I've got new faculty and staff members coming in. What kind of year-long experience can we give them to get them familiar with Ci3T, up to speed with some of, probably not all of the elements, but some of those low-intensity strategies, understanding how to look at data, what data are collected and why. And if you're kind of like in the position more of like a classroom teacher, where you're not necessarily a leader in the school right now, although, maybe in the future you might want to join that team. We have this module in the middle that's called Embedding and Integrating Ci3T Domains into Daily Instruction. This is a really cool module because it talks about what I was referencing before about how can we bring together academic objectives, behavioral expectations, and social and emotional learning to make a really holistic lesson for students that's not just teaching an academic discipline, but it's also putting those behavioral and social components into what students are learning and practicing on a daily basis. We firmly believe that that's actually really important because learning is a social activity, right? And part of our job at school is to help kids be successful at being adaptable, learning how to be successful in different environments, how to communicate with people. And so building those kinds of objectives into lessons and figuring out how to bring together those components of Ci3T, it can be challenging, but this module sort of illustrates some ways that that might be possible to do. And then this last module talks about different stakeholders that are at play or different interested parties. So how we can work with parents and students and teachers in this holistic fashion to make this model be as helpful as it can be when it's really focused across all those groups. So if you're interested in any of those ideas, we definitely encourage you to check out one of those modules. We're going to go a little bit deeper in this next section on reinforcing, and we have already had a conversation about the ticket system, and we're excited to use this as a jumping off point for actually going into one of the modules that's available to you to give you an idea for what you would see. So any of the modules you choose to investigate throughout the course of this year will have materials that are similar to what you're going to be seeing over the next couple of slides. And hopefully you'll find this to be kind of an informative training experience for how to use that ticket system in a super effective way. And just know, like, this is just one example of the kind of professional development that's available to you. So I mentioned before that, your plan has all these great ideas for how we're going to support students across academics, behavior, and social and emotional domains. But, figuring out how to actually make that happen in the real world. How do we change the way we teach? How do we change student behavior or help students change their own behavior for the better? That's a tough thing to do. And we believe that one of the tools at our disposal is reinforcement. And reinforcement is just sort of a law of behavior, that we know that behaviors happen because they've been reinforced in the past. And the best way to make sure that some behaviors happen more in the future is to intentionally reinforce them. So we'll unpack that in just a little bit. But it's at its sort of most zoomed out level, your school Ci3T manual has this procedures for reinforcing section that's going to give you some direction and instruction on how the ticket system can be used to reinforce the behavior of different folks in your school. So to jump into that, there's a section that talks about reinforcing the behavior of faculty and staff. So you all, for being here tonight, we want to acknowledge your time and effort for being here. We know it's after school and it's late. And so we applaud your effort to come and get some ideas about Ci3T and to think about how it impacts your practice. We hope that your efforts are celebrated at your school as well. And it's worth kind of keeping in mind that as we are expending our effort, like you all, even if you're not a Ci3T leadership team member, you can be someone that shapes in a positive way the behavior of your colleagues. So thinking about how you can give praise, whether it be private or public or moral support in any way to help your colleagues feel successful in what they're doing at school is a wonderful thing. And it's a wonderful tool at our disposal. And hopefully your school leaders have some ideas for how they can reinforce the behavior of all of your colleagues for participating in the Ci3T work. Sometimes this looks like drawing tickets out of a bin of tickets that students have spent at a school store, and it's the teacher who gave the ticket who might receive something like an extra plan time, which is cool because then it's like, hey, these teachers are following the expectations in terms of giving the tickets, and then we can celebrate their efforts as well through using procedures like that, which is pretty cool. And then for students, of course, we're going to be giving those Ci3T tickets or positive behavior intervention tickets. We're going to actually be calling them the universal reinforcer in a few minutes, and we'll unpack some of that language to make it kind of seem more comprehensible what that means. But the gist of it is that we're going to intermittently reinforce expectations when they're followed by using behavior-specific praise. That means just telling the student what they did that was meeting expectations and providing that ticket. And it's intermittent because it's not like we give a ticket for every behavior meeting expectations all the time, right? That's not feasible. That's not even desirable. But that sort of semi-random effort to reinforce behavior, that's what's actually going to be most effective for increasing those behaviors. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's the case. And then we've had some conversation here already about, do I have a class store? Do I have a school-wide store? Do we just do school-wide drawings? And there's no one-size-fits-all solution for how to use tickets most effectively. But we do generally recommend the most flexibility that can be used is oftentimes the better option. So if you have the option to have a school-wide store and a classroom store, you're going to get the most bang for your buck from doing that because you can tailor the way that that's used at sort of the fine-grained level in a couple ways that we'll go through in just a few minutes. And we don't want to forget the parents and community members, the family members. So anything we can do to support their efforts at home to support their students, whether that be homework completion, or just like if you notice a positive behavioral change in a student and we can call home and say, hey, like Susie is really doing her best in class. She's paying attention. She turned her homework in 3 times in a row. Like, that's awesome. And whatever you're doing at home is really, really paying off. Even if it's a kid that is doing well anyways, like taking the time to make those positive contacts with parents is so reinforcing oftentimes. It's a really good way to build relationships and help them to feel like they're engaged in this work as well. So here's where we're going to go into a little bit of a deeper dive on reinforcement. This is a module that's accessible to you on that enhanced Ci3T page. It's called Universal Reinforcement System. And just to give you an example of what you would find if you were to open up that module, there are 2 main ways that you could move through the content that's presented here. There is an ebook version, and then there's an interactive resource version. And I just realized that the ebook and interactive resource are flip-flopped here. So just in your mind, the bottom one is the ebook and the top one is the interactive resource. But the gist of it is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You could go through and read this content as a book format. It's a web-based book, and you can just kind of go through it at your own pace. It's cool because it has a lot of features that are built into it. There are little quizzes you can take. There are infographics you can download. I think there are a few videos that are peppered throughout the module in the ebook format. Super cool. But if you're in more of I want to kick back and just hear this content, I want it presented to me, I want a more of a multimedia-based experience, we also have something that's called the interactive resource. And the way that works is basically an ebook version of the module. It's got all the same content. It's got all the same downloadable resources, but it's all voiced over for you. So you can kind of hit play on that, kick back, relax, and take it in like a session like tonight, which is cool that you have multiple options for accessing this information. And what we want to do is give you the Cliff Notes version of what's in that module. But as you go through this, you might say, I wish I could go a little bit deeper on that, or I wish I could revisit that to remember, what they were saying about positive reinforcement or punishment or what have you. So just know that you can always go back to the module to kind of go deeper on any of these topics that we're going to talk through. So as we get started with this mini segment of our presentation, this is often one of the biggest questions that comes up when we're working with educators in the context of Ci3T is like, why do we have the ticket system? Why is it built in the way that it is? And often we have a lot of people that ask questions or don't particularly like this part of the system. A lot of people love it. I personally loved it. This was a huge and instrumental part of my practice when I was a special education teacher. But it can feel maybe a little bit uncomfortable for people at first. And we firmly believe that if people go and learn more about the nuts and bolts of like, what is this? Why does it work? How do we make it work? Even those folks that are a little bit more reticent to implement that part of the program, they really buy in after that because they see how it's extremely helpful for their classroom and incredibly impactful for their students. So, the starting point for this is like this word reinforcement. What does that mean? Because when we say reinforcement, a lot of people have this misconception that reinforcement is the same thing as giving rewards for people doing something that you want them to do, right? How do you reinforce behavior? In the old days, you give kids candy or something like that. And we can understand why this understanding would arise because that is a part of what can happen with reinforcement. But when we think about it only in terms of a prize or a reward for doing something that someone asked you to do, we actually miss out on a lot of the mechanics that are happening behind the scene. And we might arrive at some misunderstandings about the nature of reinforcement. So we need to actually just take a step back and think about it from a more general perspective. So when we say reinforcement, specifically what we're talking about is the act of strengthening or encouraging something. Or in another way of speaking, how can we make something happen more often? Something being a behavior. And when we start with this definition, it's important to remember that behaviors are going to be reinforced one way or another. So it's not a question of whether we should reinforce student behaviors. It's a question of how are we going to reinforce behaviors and which behaviors will be reinforced. So that's an important conclusion to come to because it sort of negates one of the initial things that people say, which occasionally you hear people say, well, we shouldn't reinforce students for meeting expectations. And although we can see why, especially at the secondary level, you'd like to believe kids should just know what the right thing to do is and they should just do it. But if we notice that kids don't always do the right thing, it's because those other behaviors have been reinforced. They're happening more often. So we need to think strategically about how can we reinforce those desired behaviors, those expectation meeting behaviors. So one way that we go about thinking about reinforcement is the act of reinforcement is when behaviors happen more often. The reinforcer is the actual thing that occurs that makes the behavior happen more often. So we're going to unpack a couple of scenarios that can show how little things in the environment act as reinforcers. It's not always a contrived thing like handing a paper ticket to someone. Reinforcement is just happening in the environment all the time. So for example, let me see if I can get this little scenario right. It's been a while. You can think about at the grocery store. When you have finished your grocery shopping and you've got your cart all filled up and you get to the front of the store and you have a choice to make. You can go to the self-checkout or you can go to the cashier and you make a choice. Say you choose to go to the self-checkout and you get to the self-checkout. It's super efficient. You can, there's no line, you get in and out and you're not really feeling like interacting with people today, right? You kind of feel like you came to the store, not to chit chat. You are here to get your stuff and move and go home. So you have that experience and it's successful. And so basically what's happening is going to the self-checkout helped you to avoid social interaction. It helped you to avoid a line and it helped you to get home more quickly. And so that's going to reinforce the behavior of going to the self-checkout line. Conversely, if you go to the cashier and you have a really pleasant conversation with somebody that's like in front of you in line and the cashier smiles at you and you have this pleasant experience,
the next time you're at the grocery store, you might choose to go back to the cashier because you had a nice experience the last time. So this kind of helps us to see that reinforcement is just a feature of the environment that's acting on our behavior all the time. And understanding that helps us to kind of think about some of the ways that we can strategically reinforce student behaviors. So as we think about what reinforcement is, it's important now to unpackage some of the details. So basically, we can think about consequences in this framework. So we have reinforcement. And reinforcement is anything that's going to make a behavior happen more often in the future. And then we have punishment. And punishment, contrary to the sort of pop culture way of thinking about punishment, or the historical way of thinking about punishment, which is punitive, negative consequences in the traditional sense. In the sense that we're talking about it, punishment just means anything that's going to happen that's going to make a behavior less likely to occur. Behaviors that are very good for people to engage in can be punishing. And sometimes that's why things like exercise doesn't happen as often, because sometimes when you exercise the first time after you haven't done anything for a while, you feel bad, and then you don't go to exercise again because you felt bad after you exercised. So punishment is just something that's going to happen in the environment as well. As we're thinking about reinforcement and punishment, we can think about positive reinforcement. I'm going to break out the laser pointer here. Positive reinforcement is when something is introduced into the environment that makes a behavior more likely to occur. So in the example from the grocery store, if the cashier smiles at you, and that smile makes it more likely that you'll go back to the cashier in the future, that smile acted as a positive reinforcer. It was something that was added to the environment that made that behavior more likely to occur. However, negative reinforcement is also a thing. And negative reinforcement has nothing to do with punishment, even though it has the word negative in it. It's not about it being bad. It's about that something is going to be taken away that's going to make a behavior more likely to occur. For example, if you were to give a student a homework pass after they met expectations during class, and they could get out of doing homework, that homework pass is going to be a negative reinforcer. It's going to take away the homework, and by taking away the homework, it's going to make the behavior that caused them to earn that pass to be more likely to occur. So it's important to think that negative reinforcement isn't about negative consequences. It's about taking something away that's going to increase a behavior. We won't get too deep into punishment. There's actually a whole separate module that's about punishment and some of the appropriate and inappropriate ways that punishment can be used, just to help kind of clarify some questions that come up around punishment. But the gist of punishment is the same as reinforcement, where it's going to make behaviors less likely to occur either by adding something or taking something away that's having that impact on behavior. Now, because our focus is on reinforcement, sorry, let me get rid of my laser pointer here. Because our focus is on reinforcement, we're going to dig into thinking about how reinforcement can make behaviors more likely to occur. A reinforcer often is something that can be, especially the reinforcer that we're talking about, right? The tickets is something that can be exchanged for what we call a primary reinforcer, something that's going to be the direct thing that's going to make that behavior more or less likely to occur. And in thinking about what those might be, there are 3 different categories that you might think about. Specifically, they are attention, tangibles and activities, and sensory experiences. And then within each of those categories, there is positive reinforcement, which means we might be adding attention, or there's negative reinforcement, which means we might be avoiding attention. So for example, you might have kids that are super social. They love to be praised by their teachers. And if they raise their hand in class and share a really cool thought about the instruction that's happening, and the teacher praises them publicly, that positive reinforcement is giving them access to attention, makes it more likely for them to raise their hand and participate in class again. For kids that really struggle in a class, maybe they don't want to do homework, having them have the opportunity to avoid an activity, like having a homework pass, that's going to be a useful reinforcement opportunity for them, because they might be motivated by avoiding something that they don't like. So having this framework available and kind of held in our minds when you're trying to figure out what kinds of things should I put on a class menu or a store menu is going to make sure that we have opportunities that are spread across these different categories. And that way we don't sort of leave anybody out. We can't assume that everyone is going to want to access teacher attention or that everyone's going to want to avoid homework. We want to make sure we kind of distribute that across those possible reinforcement ideas. So we've talked about reinforcement and things that might be reinforcing. What I want to do is a really quick activity. So I want to give you 3 scenarios, and I want you to put in the chat which one of them is reinforcing. Okay. So the first scenario is similar to what I just described. You've got your class, you're giving instruction, you ask a question that you think is a pretty hard question. Students raise their hands. One of the students gives an answer that's not quite right, and you provide some feedback to help them get the right answer, but you give them a ticket and say, I appreciate you putting your effort into answering the question, and you give them that ticket. Okay, so I want you to put in the chat, is that reinforcing or not reinforcing? Another scenario, super similar. You've got a kid who responds to a teacher's question. They come up to the board, in fact, and fill out a math problem in front of the class. They get it right, and the teacher gives them a huge smile and a big high five. Okay, is that reinforcing or not reinforcing? David is saying if the behavior increases, it's reinforcing. All right, I'll take that as an answer. All right, last scenario. I want everybody to respond to this one because it's my favorite. All right, different scenario. You've got a student who occasionally engages in work refusal. It's time for independent work in your class. You give the directions very clearly. You hand out the materials. The student does not begin. And in fact, they put their head down on the desk and they don't start. You give them a reminder that it's time to start, and they knock their pencil off the desk. And then you say, that is not respectful. You need to go to the principal's office. Okay. Is going to the principal's office reinforcing or non-reinforcing? Could be both. Absolutely. So what we're finding here is that a situation might be reinforcing or not reinforcing based on what its impacts are on behavior. The kid getting the high five in front of the classroom, if that's a super shy kid and that embarrassed them for whatever reason, they might actually be less likely to participate in the future. So if you see a decrease in participation after something like that happens, you might actually have learned something that wasn't reinforcing for that student. And likewise, being sent to the principal's office, if a student is interested in getting out of work or motivated by getting out of work, that could be very reinforcing to them as well, which would increase the frequency or likelihood of those challenging behaviors, which is all to help us kind of say, we should really be careful about how we respond to behaviors, even behaviors that we're excited to see, because we need to keep in mind what its impact will be on future behavior. And a lot of that is individually driven. And I saw the note in the chat that says Ci3T seems like it has some BF Skinner in it. And certainly there are elements of behaviorism at work in the model. Positive behavioral interventions and supports was designed years ago by people that came out of the applied behavior analysis community that worked with students with disabilities or individuals with profound disabilities, which is an incredibly effective approach at teaching new skills. And what they found was actually everybody benefits from clear instruction and expectations about behavior and opportunities to reinforce behavior strategically. So there definitely is some behaviorism at the heart of Ci3T. Okay, so then moving on from our activity, as we think about how we can use consequences to change behavior, it's helpful to kind of notice that the ticket is an important aspect of Ci3T, but it's, to clarify also, I would say Ci3T is not just the ticket. The ticket is one small tool within the overall framework. And so we're giving it attention tonight because it is something that people can get caught up on or need some help using effectively. But there is so much more to the model about using data, evidence-based intervention, great academic instruction. So this ticket is just one of the tools in our toolkits to help kids be successful across those domains. And as we think about how that can work, it's good to kind of tie together the pieces, right? So we have these school-wide expectations. They're posted across the whole school. We're giving really good instruction on how to follow those expectations. And then when students do that, when they meet the expectations, we're gonna acknowledge that verbally by giving behavior-specific praise and intermittently providing that ticket as well. Now, if you've got kids that are on the shy side and maybe they don't like public praise, we can still acknowledge those students' behavior, but you might choose to do that in a more discreet manner. So again, there's room to tailor that to the individual student preferences. And then we're going to use those tickets to help students access or avoid things using a menu of options. These are called backup reinforcers that you can exchange that ticket for an opportunity that will let you access or avoid something that's in the environment as well. These can be actual physical things. A lot of school stores are filled with pencils and erasers and tangible things. Those can be really great, but we definitely think, don't overlook or sleep on non-tangible opportunities. They can be free, and oftentimes they are way more reinforcing to students because they give them authentic experiences that they want. I think I've heard Kathleen, who's one of the originators of the Ci3T model, who does a lot of our professional learning, and she talks about how when they interviewed and surveyed middle and high school students about what they most wanted, what they really wanted was time with friends, time with peers. And so as you can think about, your school store might actually consist of mostly like coupons, be they laminated coupons or paper coupons, that give students the opportunity to have extra time with friends in a structured and positive context. Like that could be hugely impactful for kids to have those opportunities. And that's something that doesn't cost any money at all. And it's infinitely reusable, right? So being creative about those reinforcement menus is really important, as well as making sure that we're giving opportunities to access and avoid things in the environment. And then people often come to this question about like, okay, so you're telling me I should use this ticket. Like, what does the research say about this? And the good news is the research has quite a bit to say. The universal reinforcement system is a kind of token economy. Token economies have been around for a very long time. And there's good research to shows that they can be effective in a variety of settings. One of the papers that we feature in this module is a meta-analysis of single case design research. A meta-analysis is basically something that looks across all the published research that fits a certain type of study. And they try to quantify how effective a practice is across those studies. And basically this paper found 28 studies across a really long period of time. They looked at both academic behaviors, so like actual learning and participation in school, as well as more behavioral behaviors of interest as well. And what they found was a strong and positive impact on student behaviors, both in academic areas and in behavioral areas as well. And if you have any sort of interest in research, the effect size is pretty impressive here. It's 0.82. I think a lot of times we treat moderate effect sizes as kind of like 0.3 to 0.5. This is getting on the larger end of the effect size spectrum. So pretty sizable improvements in student behavior, which is absolutely something we should be excited about. And then when we think about how the ticket system fits into PBIS, and of course, PBIS is a component of our Ci3T plan. PBIS has an incredibly strong evidence base that shows it's an effective framework for supporting positive outcomes for students, which includes reducing suspensions and expulsions and overall school functioning, like higher organizational health and safety. One of my favorite PBIS studies from a long time ago was a cost analysis that looked at the amount of time that schools implementing PBIS saved. Basically, because they were reducing discipline referrals and suspensions, the amount of teacher time and administrator time that was saved was huge. And all of that time was going back into providing instruction. And what a great illustration for how, when we get these things in place, sometimes it's like, oh, I got to do a ticket system and a class store, and I have expectations. It's going to take up instructional time. But hey, it's worth it if we're reducing our time in the long run that would have been spent on managing problem behavior. And if you're interested in digging into the literature on this, there's lots of really good studies on these that are on PBIS that's coming out, which are linked in the module. We could help hook you up with those studies as well. And then another piece of this ticket system that's to our benefit. So the research says it's effective. We know that reinforcement is happening in the environment, whether we want it to or not. So the ticket system is kind of our way to harness the power of reinforcement. But what's really nice about having this ticket system is, going back to the, maybe 20 years ago when I was in school, a lot of teachers would have like a marble jar or something like that. Some classes would have a marble jar, some would have a point system, some would have a punitive system where you write your name on the board, and that's all happening in the same school. There's not much consistency there, and it makes it confusing because you got to relearn the rules of the game in every single classroom you're in. But the benefit of having a consistent system that everybody in the school is using the same language and the same procedures, there's an incredible additive benefit to that consistency because people know what to expect across settings. And especially for kids that have behavioral challenges or disabilities or potentially behavioral disorders, those are the kids that struggle the most with unpredictability, lack of structure, and not knowing what's expected of them. And so they're constantly testing the limits because they don't know what's expected. The consistency provided by the ticket system and those expectations is an incredible tool to help students in that area be more successful at school. So the consistency element of the ticket is that everyone's giving the same thing. There's no more, this teacher has a marble jar, and this teacher has a ticket system, and this teacher has a point system. Everyone's going to be giving the same ticket, and everyone's using similar procedures. We're all linking the expectations back to our expectation matrix. We're giving the ticket using positive behavior specific praise. And so students have a very consistent experience with how the system is used. But within that consistency, and this might actually seem kind of contradictory, but give me just a little leeway here. There's actually a lot of flexibility in how the ticket system can be used while still maintaining that core of consistency. I forget why we have peppers here, but I'm pretty sure it's because we said that flexibility is the spice of life or something. I'm not sure, but so the flexibility here is that because the tickets can be exchanged for those backup reinforcers, they're exchanging tickets for things or opportunities. It basically means that without that, there's no way that you can effectively reinforce everybody's behavior at the same time because everyone's reinforced by different things. Their behavior is reinforced by different things. But by making those tickets a medium for providing reinforcement and having a procedure for them to exchange tickets for things that they choose, it makes it so that that system can be effective for every single student. Let's see here. So, for example, we want to think through this function matrix, or that is what this is called, which lays out the access or avoid attention, access or avoid tangibles and activities, access or avoid sensory opportunities. By using this approach, we make sure that we're kind of checking the box for every kind of student, and by having a variety of choices, that way we're not leaving anybody out. So with that in mind, put in the chat like your favorite opportunity that students could use a ticket to access or avoid. So personally, when I was in middle school, I did not like homework. And so mine is going to be a homework pass. But please use the chat. Like, let me know, what is your favorite reinforcer opportunity that's available in your school or that you could imagine? Oh, that's a good one. Run an errand for a teacher. Everybody likes to feel useful. So being the messenger is pretty cool. That's good. Quiet lunch. Quiet lunch is cool because that is the sensory aspect, right? The lunchroom can be chaotic and loud, and some people love that. They feed on that. But for some people that are more reserved or shy or have sensory processing difficulties, that can be very stressful. So having the opportunity to have a quiet lunch, pretty great. Eric wants to eat out, spending his money at Chipotle. First to line up. Leaving 5 minutes early at the end of the day. Yeah, nice. Go outside for a class. Yeah, this is the time of year to do that. That's a good point. Saving running errands for when you need a break from a student. Fair enough. That is also a good strategy to give yourself a break sometimes. Okay, so to return to this idea of flexibility, an issue that comes up with some regularity is people will say things like, hey, the ticket system works great for a lot of my kids, but it does not work for, and they'll name a few kids, and they're naming the kids that are probably experiencing behavioral difficulties anyways. So it's important to remember that ticket system and the way that it's designed gives you the opportunity to continue making some refinements through the course of your working with students, to help make it work for that student. So if it's not working already, we don't give up on the system. We think about how we can make little tweaks here and there to make it work for the student. So when we think about what can be changed, there are three main ways that we can change the way the system is working. One of the ways that we can change it is change the rate of reinforcement. If we are noticing that a student is engaging in a lot of challenging behavior, it can seem a little counterintuitive, but a really good place to start is find those times when the student is engaging in appropriate or expected behavior. And I guarantee you, if you look for them, they are there. And you got to sneak in and you provide reinforcement at a pretty high rate. for those expected behaviors, because you're building that momentum and you're showing them that the best way to get my attention and the best way to get cool experiences at school is to be meeting expectations. So that rate of reinforcement is a really, really powerful sort of domain to tweak in how you're using the reinforcer. Of course, the options for reinforcers are also one thing that we can change. Sometimes students will have individualized menus of opportunities to use tickets. And sometimes that just is necessitated by the level of need. So some students that have pretty significant support needs, they might need a more tailored set of reinforcers. And that kind of makes sense, right? We differentiate instruction, so shouldn't we also differentiate behavioral support? And sometimes students' developmental levels. So I worked at the elementary level, and you could find students in the same grade that have very different interests and developmental levels. So sometimes we had to work together to find things that we're going to be reinforcing if we kind of weren't hitting the mark for some of the students. So that's a really important aspect as well. And then lastly, and this is one that gets overlooked sometimes, the frequency with which students can select options or, use their tickets to shop. So a lot of students once a week can be great. Sometimes even, less frequently than that. That can be totally fine for them. But if you have kids that are experiencing behavioral difficulty and the ticket system doesn't seem to be working, but you're giving tickets at a pretty high rate, and that you're using reinforcer options that they would like, or you think that they would like, one thing you can do is to say, well, how often can they actually use the tickets to get those things? And if you're on a weekly schedule, maybe weekly is just too long and you need to shorten it up. Any of these changes don't have to be a forever change. These are things that you can systematically tweak over time based on how things are going. But those are some of the primary ways that you can make that system work for students who maybe at first it doesn't work for. So that is sort of an issue sometimes, is helping people to see, like, why do students who engage in problem behavior sometimes have more opportunities to earn tickets? I'm doing some learning around, like, hey, sometimes that rate needs to go up for those kids, and it doesn't necessarily have to stay that way forever, but that is going to be our first step in helping to increase those expected behaviors. Okay, so in summary, the consistency and flexibility of the system is a huge benefit, and one that's definitely worth investing in for your school. And as we wrap up, I want to give just a couple little brief scenarios that can show how using the tickets in a certain manner is probably beneficial, and using tickets in another manner might actually be unhelpful or disadvantageous. And I think doing this can kind of clarify some of the big misunderstandings that people run into when they're trying to use the ticket system. So one thing you would want to avoid is oftentimes people are tempted to bundle tickets together. Maybe you don't hear from a student very often in class, and then they raise their hand and they participate, and you're like, oh, that's so awesome, I'm going to give you 2 tickets. And we're weirdly sending a message that some behaviors are more valuable than others. And it sort of muddies the water a little bit in terms of how that system is being used. So our recommendation is always just go ahead and give a single ticket for those behaviors. But if you're finding that you don't have many opportunities to give a student tickets, we might increase the rate of reinforcement, but still giving 1 ticket per occurrence. This is a really important one. Oftentimes people will sort of say, I don't like the ticket system. It's like bribing kids for doing the right thing. And bribing is a interesting terminology because usually bribing implies you're coercing someone into doing something that's bad for them. However, at certain points, dangling a reward in front of someone, even to do something that would be good for them to do, can feel a little bit coercive, right? So if you find a student who's engaging in problem behaviors, maybe they're off task, maybe they're being disruptive, and you say to that student, if you follow directions, I will give you a ticket. That can actually be very disadvantageous both for the student and for ourselves, because we're setting up this situation where the student recognizes that they're getting attention for acting out, and they're getting an opportunity to earn that reinforcer for acting out. And we're accidentally setting up a scenario where the student might learn that acting out is the best way to get both of those things. So we really don't want to interact with students in that fashion. What we would prefer to do is remind students of the expectations and then move on, or potentially reinforce other students in the area who are meeting expectations. Then when that student who was engaging in challenging behavior gets back on track, that's the time to reinforce their behavior. That way, they're not making the connection between misbehaving and earning a ticket, but rather demonstrating those expectations and earning the ticket. That's an important distinction. And then Another one that we'll run into is when students are really engaging in challenging behavior, it's tempting to say you can't earn tickets that way, or to say that's it, you're not going to earn any more tickets for the rest of the day, or even to say, sorry, you are not allowed to shop anymore, for today or for this week. And although I definitely get why we can become very frustrated with student behavior at times, it kind of puts us into a box where we are losing options for what we can do to support that student. And we're kind of saying, you've crossed this line in the sand from which you can't come back. And once students perceive that they have crossed that line, where do they have to go, but maybe even more escalated behavior. So we want to avoid that kind of ultimatum. And instead, we're going to show empathy. We're going to remind students of the expectations, and then we're going to put our attention somewhere else, hopefully a student that is meeting expectations. And you'll probably recognize some of these steps are from that 6-step instructional approach. This will not solve every behavior problem, but it will help us to make sure that we don't accidentally make behavior problems more likely to occur in the future by accidentally reinforcing undesired behaviors or difficult behaviors, or potentially putting students into that uncomfortable position of feeling like, well, I can't do anything right now, so the only thing I can do is to, engage in more challenging behavior. Sure, yeah. Asked if we could talk a little bit more about empathy. The module that's about the 6-step instructional approach to challenging behavior actually has a whole section about this. And Eric, if you'll put the link for that module in the chat. Basically, what we recommend around empathy is short, discrete, private statements of like, hey, it looks like you're having a hard time right now. I see you. I want to be there for you. I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes, and we can chat about what's bothering you. And by doing that, we're avoiding accidentally just announcing to the class that this kiddo is having a hard time. We're not letting them completely co-opt the instruction that's happening in the classroom, right? By completely stopping instruction to manage this difficult occurrence. So no, it's not empathy for the specific behaviors, but it's more like, I can see you're having a really hard time right now. And oftentimes with the showing of empathy, we're going to do some limit setting as well. So if they're already at that really escalated peak behavior, we're not going to empathize with the destructive behavior. We're going to empathize with their emotional challenge that's happening. And hopefully what we can do is actually prevent that escalated behavior from happening, because rather than potentially kind of nagging on unmet expectations earlier, we're going to show empathy earlier in the cycle. And by showing empathy earlier in the cycle and saying, hey, it looks like you're having a hard time right now, but instead of me saying, get started on your work, get started on your work, get started on your work, which oftentimes that leads to that escalated behavior. Instead, we're going to say, hey, I can see you're not ready to get started yet. Maybe you're having a hard day. I'm going to come back and check on you in just a second, and let's see what we can do to help you get ready, right? So even the showing of empathy does sometimes require a little bit more thinking through what that means. And that's why that module is super helpful, because it basically says, here's what you should do, here's what you should avoid, and here's why you should do it. And so, yeah, even just sort of simple guidance like that is kind of helpful to have a little bit of extra detail. So yeah, I'm glad that's helpful. Okay, so our next talk time is we'd love for you to just share with us some of the things that you've done to teach expectations for students this year, or some of your reflections on the reinforcement system based on the content that we just chatted about. And if it's okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can actually see it. And the last section of that procedures part of your manual is procedures for monitoring. So one of the things you'll hear us say the most is that Ci3T is a data-informed model. And so we want to make sure that you all kind of have an idea for some of the data sources that you get to look at as teachers, and data sources that your school leaders are looking at to think about how your Ci3T model is performing. So two things that may be new or maybe not new. Social validity is something that's going to be collected from your perspective twice a year as part of normal Ci3T practices. Social validity is how people feel about the goals, procedures, and outcomes of the plan. In brief, do you feel like it's working? Do you think that the things that are being asked of you are reasonable? And do you think it targets things that are important for kids to be successful? And then treatment integrity is going to be assessed at the same time. And treatment integrity is another way of saying fidelity, or saying, are we implementing this plan as intended? These data are gathered in a couple ways that I'll unpack in just a moment. But what they are ways that your school leadership team gets a really big overview with how Ci3T work is happening at your school. And hopefully they're able to take that information and customize supports for faculty and staff and make adjustments to make sure that people are feeling positively about the plan and are implementing it successfully. And then for you all at the sort of the classroom level, we encourage you to think about this on your own perspective as well, from like, am I implementing all these pieces as designed? And if not, that is okay. Like this is a marathon, not a sprint. There's a lot of moving pieces that are happening in the classroom that relate to Ci3T. And so giving yourself some grace is important, but also knowing like, hey, where are the pain points? Where are the things that I can keep working on? And what can I do to learn more or to get additional support or coaching? That's a really important use of treatment integrity data because it sort of empowers you to know where you are in your professional journey with respect to Ci3T. And then, of course, you're also going to have access to systematic screening data. In your districts, oftentimes you're going to use the student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing behaviors, for assessing how students are doing in terms of behavioral performance. And then you've got screeners and benchmarking tools to figure out how students are doing academically as well. And in your school's manual, in that procedures for monitoring section, there are a few great places that you can go to look like to see like what are our overall implementation goals. And it's kind of nice to know what your school leadership team is working towards, because it kind of helps make sense of what they're choosing to do in terms of professional development or sharing out information with faculty and staff. And if you're ever curious, you can always go to your leadership team and say, hey, I'd like to see some of the data that you all are looking at. And oftentimes they'd be happy to share that with you so that you can kind of get in there and take a look and see what implementation is looking like at your school as well. So again, social validity, and it's good to kind of dig into these terminologies because they can feel a little bit unfamiliar. This is how people feel about the significance of the goals. You know, is it important? Is it targeting important things for students? The acceptability of the procedures and the relevance and importance of the outcomes. So this is measured through a survey that goes out to all faculty and staff twice a year, and it's summarized with great detail, but it also can be boiled down to an overall percentage. And oftentimes this percentage predicts, if people feel positively about the plan, that predicts that they'll implement it with greater levels of treatment integrity, which is great to know because I think it's like reinforcing and heartening to know like, I will do things that I feel positively about, and things that I don't really think will work, I'm going to spend less time doing. And if I can share with my leaders and colleagues about like, this is what I think will work, and this is what I'm less enthusiastic about, oftentimes that can kind of shape the way that implementation breaks out in your school. And if you're interested by the measures that are being used to assess these, on our website, we have a measures tab where you can actually go and take a look and preview what a lot of those measures look like. There's also a direct observation that happens where teachers get randomly selected to get observed in a quick little 30-minute observation. Generally, people will come to your class and say, hey, can I do a quick 30-minute Ci3T observation? And if you want to, you say, sure, come on in. And if you'd prefer not to, usually you can just say, I'd prefer not to for now. But that is a cool additional way that you can get some feedback and some firsthand observation knowledge about how those Ci3T practices are being implemented. So we're going to now wrap up. We've completed the first Empower session. We have loved having you here. Terrific engagement. We'd love to see you back at the next session, which is going to happen in October. If you have colleagues who you think might be benefiting from coming to learn more about Ci3T in general, we'd love to have anybody that you recommend at your school to come. The next topic is going to be all about systematic screening. So it's going to be that data-informed piece. How do we look at data and figure out which kids might need tier 2 or tier 3 interventions? And how do we get that process moving for students? So yeah, the focus is going to be all about looking at data and making decisions about, should we invest in tier 1? Like, do we have so many students who are needing more support that we really should invest in making that tier 1 experience as robust as possible? Or should we invest our efforts into enhancing some of the teachers delivered strategies like behavior specific praise, instructional choice? Or should we go on to moving, connecting students to tier 2 and tier 3 interventions? And so we'll be talking about the data sources themselves and starting to point you in directions of specific resources you can access to actually learn specific interventions or specific strategies that can be used as targeted supports when students are showing that they might need more than what tier 1 has to offer. So our Empower sessions are one way that you can get a hold of us. If you're ever wishing that you could just drop in and ask a quick question, if you're grappling with an implementation question or something like that. We also have monthly trainer and coaches calls that each of you are welcome to join if you'd like. You can find the schedule for that on our website at the professional learning tab. If you look for this trainer and coaches call segment, there's a little flyer that you can register for these. And I think the Zoom links are just right there for you as well. So if you just want to hop on one of those calls to ask your question, we would love to have you. The overall professional learning series for this year is moving on. We're going to be working with leadership team members at a lot of schools, mostly elementary schools this year. But if you're a middle or high school teacher and you're looking for more information, we'd love to have you at subsequent Empower sessions. We'd really encourage you, having been here tonight, to share back some of the things that you learned with your colleagues. So let them know that they can go to that enhanced tab of the website. Let them know that all of those modules are there for them to use if they'd like to. If you've got people grappling with issues around reinforcement, we think that module is a great place to start. Or if it's the challenging behavior piece, that 6-step instructional approach to challenging behavior module that was featured and talked about a little bit was great as well. So definitely think about how you can share that back with your faculty and staff. And we look forward to seeing you next time if you'd love to join us.